recording. We're live. UFC Fight Night Seattle, Adesanya versus Pyfer just took place last night, and it was an absolute banger of a card. So much so, in fact, that it brought all the casuals out, including this guy. We got a lot to talk about, so let's just dive right in with the first fight, starting with Alexia Thainar versus Bruna Brazil. Now, I don't know what was going on with the matchmaking in this fight. We got Bruna Brazil, who is the definition of a win-one, lose-one fighter. She's coming off a loss. Before that, coming off a win from Shi Ming, of all people. Random fight, but it did happen. She beat Shi Ming. And now they have her up against Alexia Thainar, who's coming off, I believe, a 4-fight win streak. She has wins over Molly McCann and a couple other really good people. So, again, I don't know what they were doing here. Either they just really highly rate Bruna Brazil's skills, or they just wanted to give Alexia Thainar an easy fight. Either way, great fight to start the prelims. Both of them came out with a very fast pace. Alexia Thainar coming in strong, trying to implement her wrestling. Didn't really necessarily work in the first round. In the first round, I believe Bruna took that. She was doing what she does, leg kick merchant, and was actually hurting Alexia Thainar. I think eventually the grappling of Alexia Thainar was too much for Bruna Brazil. We move on. Ricky Simón versus Adrian Yanez. Discount WrestleMania main event right here. Ricky Simón, the wrestler. Adrian Yanez, the boxer. And interesting matchup. I, like many others, thought that Ricky Simón was going to edge this one out, just being the veteran, being able to mix it up. I was never really that impressed with anything Adrian Yanez does, but he has a couple great knockouts, and clearly he's a good striker. And honestly, he won this fight. To be honest, I did have money on Ricky Simón, so that might influence my opinion a little bit, but I honestly could see how he could won the first rounds. I know, sue me, but he was landing decent shots, but I will admit that most of those shots were landing right on the guard. Really wasn't doing that much damage, and overall the body language was just much better coming from Adrian Yanez. He had the perfect game plan, great stance, hands were low, completely ready to intercept the takedowns, doing a great job, distance management. I mean, everything you could ask for in that type of performance where you're going up against a grappler. And by the time we got to the third round, the strike differential really started to get big on the Yanez side. He started absolutely styling on Ricky Simón and started to bust him open real bad. I mean, Adrian Yanez was beating up Ricky Simón as if he owed him money. Almost finished him at the end of the round. They started swinging, brawling. Adrian Yanez caught him with a huge overhand right and wobbled him badly. Definitely a 10-8 round. And according to the judges, the 10-8 round didn't matter because Ricky Simón won 2 rounds, which is a little crazy. But I guess the judges were really big Ricky Simón fans or something like that. Maybe they just like the dude because he's from Seattle. Or maybe Seattle is just a horrible city for combat sports. Who knows? We move on. Navajo Sterling versus Bruno Lopez. Now, we can get into this fight where Navajo Sterling looked much improved from his last performance, getting the second round TKO over Bruno Lopez. But what I'm really interested in is the curious case of Navajo Sterling's disappearing hairline, or at least the hairline that he used to have. When this man debuted, he had kind of a Charles Oliveira thing going on, and now he has a perfectly straight, perfectly flat 90-degree angle on his head. Looks good on him. I guess the UFC money goes a long way in New Zealand. He's got himself a couple new tattoos and honestly looking significantly more jacked than his last couple performances. Honestly, going all the way back from the Contender Series, I never really thought he was anything that special. Kind of a decision merchant, kind of a leg kick merchant. He'll fling a couple head kicks here and there. I always thought his boxing was it left something to be desired. And he went out and looked much better than he normally does. Got him clean, dropped Bruno Lopez, didn't finish the fight immediately, got a classic late stoppage moment. Referee must have had money on Bruno Lopez to survive because it went a lot longer than it really needed to. Bruno Lopez taking lots of unnecessary damage. The finish being pretty brutal with Navajo Sterling basically putting Bruno Lopez in a cane-style chokehold and just kind of punching him in the face until the referee pulled him off. Brutal finish. Good win for Navajo Sterling. I'm excited to see where he goes. I'm guessing a ranking spot is what he's going to be fighting for in the light heavyweight division. We move on. Casey O'Neill versus Gabriela Fernandez. Now, Gabriela Fernandez was the dog going into this fight. but I actually thought she had a great chance of winning. She herself is on a pretty decent win streak. She has wins over Carly Judice and Wang Kong. That was the last fight that I remember her being, where she was a massive, massive underdog in the Wang Kong fight and surprisingly dropped her and ended up getting her to the ground, choking her out. Now, then again, Wang Kong was kind of messing around during that fight. She wasn't really taking it all that seriously and paid the price dearly. But I had a feeling that Gabriela Fernandez, she was going to be able to mix it up. She was going to be able to be a little tougher. Casey O'Neill hasn't been seen since 2024, coming off a knee surgery. And before that, before 2022, she hasn't had a win since 2022, I just said. So it was not looking good for Casey O'Neill. I thought we were about to get a Gabriela Fernandez masterclass. Unfortunately, we get a first round KO somehow. I guess that just can happen in women's divisions, where you could somehow completely tear your MCL and your ACL and get surgery for it and somehow come back 2 years later and get a knockout, ranked knockout. So, or no, actually no, Gabriela Fernandez is not ranked, but still great win for her. Surprised. I don't really know where she goes from here. Maybe she gets back in the cage pretty quick and we can see a quick turnaround for Casey O'Neill. Excited to see what happens for her. We move on. Heavyweight, Marcin Tybura versus Tyrell Fortune. Now, I actually think that Tyrell Fortune, as the commentator said, was a great addition to the roster. Has a great wrestling background, but we all know that wrestling may not be enough to save the Blues. Kind of a boring fight, as is with heavyweight. When you don't get a brawl within the first 2 minutes, it kind of turns into a sloppy slugfest. Kind of ends up looking like two drunk uncles outside of a bar. Kind of a boring fight. The type of fight where you scroll Instagram reels in the middle of the fight and just kind of listen to the commentary. But yes, we do that here because we're casuals. But overall, I definitely thought that Tyrell Fortune won the fight, even though I wasn't necessarily paying attention all the way. When they ended up calling the decision, I was shocked, but I didn't really protest. I said, wow, Marcin Tybura got it done. His crafty vet status helped him out. But obviously something went wrong when, instead of giving Marcin Tybura his win speech, they decided to hold the camera on his face for an uncomfortably long amount of time. And he was just kind of standing there thinking that he won, mind you, just kind of sitting there looking all happy. And until it wasn't so happy for him. They called Tyrell Fortune back into the octagon and ended up having Bruce Buffer reread the decision. And honestly, I was a little afraid that they were just going to call it a draw. That probably would have made more sense as to why there was a mistake. But nope, I guess they just fucked it up because I don't know what happened, if they got the rounds mixed up, if they got the scorecards mixed up. But Marcin Tybura did not win that fight. Got booted out of the octagon, and Marcin Tybura Tyrell Fortune probably had a mini heart attack. But he looked okay, has a ranking next to his name now, but I didn't really think it was the most impressive performance. Many guys have beaten Marcin Tybura before, and if you beat Marcin Tybura, I think all that really shows is that you're an all right heavyweight. Doesn't necessarily prove much, but we'll see what happens with him in the future. Next fight, Chase Hooper versus Lance Gibson Jr. Now, this is a fight that put depression into the hearts of all gooners across the nation. Sadly, Chase Hooper does what he does best. When he doesn't submit his geriatric opponent, he will go out there and look like an absolute scrawny little twig and get knocked out in brutal fashion. Now, I honestly thought that Chase Hooper was going to get the submission. I don't think it was that crazy to think that he could beat a guy who lost to King Green. And even though he did go to split decision, I honestly feel like he lost that fight pretty handedly. And even though Bobby Green has shown that he's a veteran, he's crafty, he can be a tough fight, but I didn't really think that Lance Gibson Jr., I don't think he showed anything impressive in that performance at all. But clearly, he came out in this fight with something to prove. He came out throwing big right hands, winging big elbows, and landing. Chase Hooper would try to tie up with him. Big mistake. Lance Gibson Jr., that was a giant elbow off the break. Rocks Chase Hooper badly, has him doing the chicken dance, the whole 9 yards. His second loss in a row by TKO. I don't know what's next for Chase Hooper. I see people talking about him moving to featherweight, but I don't really think that's the case. I just think he needs to get better at fighting. He has great jiu-jitsu and a great ground game, but he goes out there and he looks like a little freaking nerd. I mean, part of fighting is the mental aspect, and I don't think anyone is ever going to be afraid of a Chase Hooper, unfortunately. I don't even think I would be afraid of him, but he'd probably twist me into a pretzel. Good win for Lance Gibson Jr. We'll see what happens with him. I honestly, even though he had a good performance, I'm not sure how far he makes it in the UFC. We move on to the featured fight of the prelims, Ignacio Bahamondes versus Taufik Musayev. Now, Ignacio Bahamondes was coming into this fight as a massive favorite, and he was looking great for the first round and a half. You know, doing a great job, keeping his range, you know, throwing in the low kicks, swinging them high every once in a while, doing what he needed to do. And all of a sudden, the tides of the fight change with one fence grab. Taufik Musayev is a little dirty cheater. He may sleep with sheep. We don't know. But he's a dirty little cheater. I don't necessarily hold it against these guys whenever they do these type of things. It's a fight. Stuff happens. Low blows happen. Eye pokes happen. I've accepted it at this point. But that was a pretty egregious fence grab. It quite literally stopped the takedown from Ignacio Bahamondes, and he ended up getting reversed. And all it took was one big elbow. One big elbow from Taufik Musayev basically imprinted a vagina onto the forehead of Ignacio Bahamondes. And after that, he was not having a good time. He was getting absolutely battered on the ground. No hope from that point on. I'm surprised he even made it to the end of the round. I'm surprised this fight went to a decision. Now, there was also a headbutt in the second round, which the ref did not see once again. And it was real disappointing to see. I would have liked to see a point deducted because it was clearly intentional, in my opinion. Headbutted him right in front of the referee. Huge fence grab, you know, completely changed the tire of the fight. I think that's one of those things where you have to take a point. But some of these referees suck, especially in the great state of Washington. So good win for Taufik Musayev. Stops Ignacio Bahamondes. Ignacio Bahamondes has some work to do in terms of his fight IQ, because although Taufik Musayev is a dirty sheep, shouldn't say that. Although he's a dirty cheater, I can't fully take Ignacio Bahamondes off the hook after his egregious fight IQ mistakes, pulling guard off bottom, trying to pull off submissions when he's absolutely slick with blood. I mean, I don't know what his idea was. Instead of trying to shrimp up, instead of trying to make space and trying to get up on his feet, he was trying to get submissions. Throughout the entire fight, even at the very end, while completely covered in blood, he ended up reversing Taufik Musayev and tried to go for the rear naked choke. But there was no way in hell he was going to get that. I think we should just understand at this point that if you're deep into a second or third round, a submission off your back is probably not going to work. But what do I know? We move on to the main card, Terrance McKinney versus Kyle Nelson. Now, I think this fight went down exactly how most of us thought it would go down, with Terrance McKinney getting the KO in round 1 over Kyle Nelson. This is the kind of fight where you could honestly just look at these guys. You could look at these two and just kind of see how the fight is going to go. Kyle Nelson, although I have respect for him, is a little bit of a scrub. Hasn't really fought anyone of note in the UFC. And this was a dangerous, dangerous matchup for him, and I knew it. Started off strong. He landed a good little low kick that buckled Terrance McKinney. Hard low kick. But from then on, you know, Terrance McKinney backed him up against the fence, threw a head kick, which landed partially on his guard. But, you know, it still definitely hit him. But Kyle Nelson absolutely just folded to the ground, gave no resistance. From that point, it was over. Took a couple extra shots and clearly wanted a way out at that point. Terrance McKinney gets a round 1 TKO. Beautiful performance from him. Shout out to Michael Chiesa's wrestling pupil. We move on to Mansur Abdulmalik versus Yusari Balagori. Now, I have been waiting to say this for a long time, but Mansur Abdulmalik, believe it or not, is not actually that good. Now, I don't think anyone is really hyping up his abilities to that extent, but the commentary team was definitely giving him lots of praise, saying that he has an undefeated record, even though he just recently got a fight overturned to a no contest. And you just look at Mansur Abdulmalik's career, and he's barely scraping by bottom of the barrel guys. Could have said that he beat Cody Brundage, but unfortunately the fight got overturned. He did definitely headbutt him hard on the way to the ground. So I think the rule of thumb is that if you can't beat Cody Brundage clean, I'm not sure if you're going to have a good time in the UFC. Now, this other guy I didn't really know all that well, has an awesome name that I'm definitely going to keep calling him. And he's coming off 3 TKOs in a row, had a great performance, was on Dana White's Contender Series twice, lost his first fight to Marco Trulio. And that guy is actually really good. Hasn't lost a fight in the UFC except for his last one to CLD. Shout out to Mr. Three First Names, Christian Leroy Duncan. His one loss was Marco Trulio. Other than that, he is undefeated in the UFC. TKOs all the way. This guy is a hot prospect. He's a beast. You need to look after him. Look for his next fight. I'm sure it's going to be a banger. I can't wait to see what he does next. Next fight, Julian Erosa versus Laurent Douglas. Now, Julian Erosa put on the type of performance that you would see from you're versing your buddy in the UFC 5 video game and you're doing stand and bang mode and you can't grapple. You just knock down your opponent probably 4 or 5 times before you decide to finish him. And that's kind of how this fight went. It was somewhat competitive at the, maybe in the first 30 seconds, and immediately Julian Erosa gets rocked. Now, I would have thought that Julian Erosa would have put up a slightly better fight. I know that Julian Erosa has been knocked out multiple times in his career, but he also has knockouts of himself. I think he's a pretty tough cookie, but Laurent Douglas is the real deal. I just didn't know how to rate him before the fight. He was coming off one sole win off of Dana White's Contender Series against a ginger, and we all know how ginger people fight not very well, unless you're missing an eye and your name is Shar Bullet. But even then, was a great win for him, gets the knockout, and looked sharp, looked smooth, and honestly the best debut win you could ask for in the featherweight division. Julian Erosa is a hell of a gatekeeper. Getting past him and knocking him out that easily, I think honestly it says good things about his career going forward. So we'll see where Laurent Douglas goes next. We move on to Michael Chiesa versus Niko Price, the last dodo bird himself. Now, we know how the UFC treats our beloved fighters. We all know that if you in any way have any type of fans in the UFC, in your last fight, you are guaranteed to be matched up with an absolute monster of a prospect, probably 15 years younger than you, absolutely roided up, and he's going to slime you out in front of your wife and kids. And there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what the UFC wants, right? They really just want to use your name to build up their newest hot and coming fighters, right? And we've seen this before. But if you are an old head in the UFC, if you are in any way close to retirement, there is no better opponent that you could ask for than Niko Price. Niko Price is the type of fighter to literally throw himself into the positions that you want him in. If you want to knock him out, he will provide his chin on a silver platter. If you want to choke him out, he's showing you his neck. And that's pretty much what happened in this fight. Niko Price went in there with the game plan of, let me try to wrestle the wrestling coach. And it went about as well as you'd think. Gets submitted early in the first round. Michael Chiesa adding to his record of having the second most amount of rear naked chokes in UFC history. And cute little retirement with his mother, his kids, all that stuff. Remember, don't talk about Michael Chiesa's mom. And I'm surprised they even put together a halfway decent fight package for him. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I know that he has quite a few submission victories, and he's beaten a lot of good guys, but I'm surprised they could put together enough highlights to make a retirement package for Michael Chiesa. But still a decent win. Great. A way to end off his career. Shout out to the Maverick, Michael Chiesa. Thank you for giving us Terrance McKinney, by the way. Appreciate that. Also, don't talk about Michael Chiesa's mom. We move on to the co-main. Alexa Grasso versus Macy Barber. Now, I don't know what the odds makers were smoking in this fight, making Macy Barber the betting favorite. I think, honestly, and this is Rich coming from the biggest casual of them all, but I think that casuals were severely overrating Macy Barber's skills. She's coming off a win against a person, maybe a UFC fighter in her last fight. And it was a good win, but I think that honestly most people saw that fight. It was on a pay-per-view in MSG, and I'm pretty sure Macy Barber got like 50,000 Instagram followers after that fight. I'm pretty sure most people picking her just think that she looks hot, and they're moving on from Alexa Grasso, who was the sweetheart of the MMA community last year. And I honestly think people forgot, man. I mean, these two fought many years ago, and Alexa got the win. So I was just kind of not thinking about it that hard. I don't think Macy Barber is that good. She's never been at the top of the division. And Alexa Grasso has elite grappling, and she's tough. And she's been at the top of the division for a while now and has been fighting the toughest girls. Just because she lost to Natalia Silva doesn't really make her lose any type of stock. Natalia Silva is slowly starting to show that she's one of the best fighters in her division. A title shot is clearly coming her way soon. So I just knew that the fight was going to go this way. I was happy to see Alexa get the win. She hits Macy with a nasty straight right hand, rocks Macy Barber badly to the point where she kind of like wobbled and basically gave her back to Alexa Grasso, which is the last thing that you probably want to do against Alexa Grasso. I get that she was rocked, but feeding your back to Alexa Grasso is asking for brain damage, which is probably what happened. I was a little scared for Macy Barber. She basically got knocked out and choked out, and she kind of just laid there on the canvas. It was like a weird delayed reaction, and she just kind of laid there staring up at the lights for a while. And again, the camera, unfortunately, stayed on her for an uncomfortably long amount of time. And if it wasn't for her breathing, I would have thought that we saw the first death in the octagon. Legitimately the very first death in the octagon. And we were about to see it in HD. But she ended up being fine. She ended up getting up. Great sportsmanship from Alexa Grasso. But that was scary for a minute. I really did think that Macy Barber was going to pass it away. What a tragedy for the MMA community that would have been. Great win for Alexa Grasso. I honestly see another title eliminator in her future, maybe even a title shot. We know how UFC loves their Mexicans. They love to push them. Performance of the night, by the way, for Alexa Grasso. Good for her. And also just great night for women's MMA in general. All three of our WMMA fights on this card were great. None of them were piss breaks. So shout out to y'all. We move on to the main event. Israel Adesanya versus Joe Nobody Cam Pyfer. Unfortunately, we did not get Dog Bender in this fight. We got a weird version of Izzy in this fight. So I thought it was actually very interesting matchmaking, first of all. Even though Joe Pyfer is not ranked very highly, he's clearly shown himself to be the hardest hitter in that division, unless, you want to still count guys like Gregory Rodriguez and Bruno Ferreira. But I think Joe Pyfer sparks both of those guys, honestly. I thought that Joe Pyfer was good enough to be in the top 10. I had assumed that Israel Adesanya was going to be levels ahead of Joe Pyfer in terms of striking. But Joe Pyfer came out with a very interesting smash and grab style, started off striking, moved on to the grappling, was switching it up and mixing it up very well, but it wasn't enough at first. Israel Adesanya looked sharp at the beginning. He almost looked like he was in his prime fashion. Just like the DDP fight, he was using his feints, using his low kicks, keeping the range, doing exactly what I would have expected him to do. And he was winning handedly, especially when it came to the calf kicks. The calf kicks really started to add up. You could see the visible damage on Joe Pyfer's leg. You could see the grimace in his face, his reactions. He was not loving those low kicks. I literally had sort of a Final Destination premonition moment, where I saw Joe Pyfer getting KO'd. I saw Joe Pyfer getting KO'd by Israel Adesanya. It was just going to be a matter of time. And then something weird happened. Israel Adesanya just decided that he didn't want to win the fight anymore, I guess. It's not that simple. I think, honestly, he was taking big shots. I think in the post-fight presser, he was saying something like he had been inactive for a while and he wanted to know what it was like to be in a brawl, which is probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I think that we are currently seeing a version of Israel Adesanya that has some severe mental issues going on. Maybe not severe. I was thinking about Joe Pyfer before this fight started. He was giving me weird vibes. Again, I thought he was just going to get sparked, but Izzy is clearly on another level when it comes to the mental illness, because he was just, I don't know what the game plan was there. I don't know why he just decided to stop doing what he was doing. Maybe he saw that he hurt Joe Pyfer to the leg and decided to chase the finish. But what ended up just happening was he took a couple of big shots and was hurt badly. He got pushed up against the fence, and I think we were all thinking the same thing. Is he playing possum? Is he trying to set up a trap? I honestly don't really think so. I mean, maybe he was playing possum. Probably he was. But he didn't throw anything. He just looked hurt. The body language was not pretty coming from Israel Adesanya. After that, he took, I believe, a big body punch and then got taken down. And from then on, it started compounding the hurt that Izzy was about to start feeling. Starts taking huge ground and pound shots, big elbows, big punches. Eventually, he tries rolling onto his stomach to try to avoid the shots and only ends up making things worse for himself. He kind of just stopped defending at a certain point. And let me tell you, there's nothing more depressing than to watch a fighter you love essentially just wilt and wiggle away. It's a sad way to see the last style bender go. I've had a love-hate relationship with Israel Adesanya, but overall, I do believe that he has one of the most fun and exciting styles, at least when he was a contender. He is a legend, and, you know, I don't know where his career goes from here. I'm not really sure who else you can give Adesanya that's lower ranked than Joe Pyfer that is going to be a big enough name to give Izzy. I honestly believe that from now on, Izzy is going to be reserved to not the prelims, maybe like a co-main event. Co-main event, main card. I could see that in the future for Izzy. His opponent, I mean, the Vettori rematch is honestly not far off from his reach at this point. So who knows who they're going to give him. I assume they would still give him someone in the rankings, honestly, because the UFC does love Israel Adesanya. He said in his post-fight interview he's not going anywhere, but we'll see what happens with the career of the last style bender. Good win for Joe Pyfer. Speaking of hairlines, another miraculously saved hairline. Shout out to Turkey and Turkish Airlines for saving these fighters from embarrassment. You'd think these guys would be more secure with themselves. But Joe Pyfer gets a big win in the main event, and I see him getting matched up with probably a DDP, maybe, if the UFC likes him enough. But probably more likely maybe like a Brendan Allen. So we'll see what happens with Joe Pyfer. Overall, it was an absolutely sick card, banger fights, mostly finishes, probably one of the best fight nights we've had in a while, better than some pay-per-views. Great, great night overall, though it sucked to see Israel Adesanya lose in the way that he did. I don't know about you guys. After I heard the decision get read, I kind of just turned off my TV and my night was sort of over from there. But the rest of the fight's pretty damn sick. Next week, we're going to be talking about Mekozel Costa versus Arnold Allen. We got ourselves an Apex main event, so don't miss it. Nah, that's good enough.